A Frenchman discovered an ancient underwater city in Egypt that leaves us amazed. The artifacts and art treasures of this mysterious city are so rich and unusual that they defy all logic. The legend of a city called Thonis-Heracleion suddenly became reality with this find. We now have to face the astonishing facts of these latest findings. Who were the ancient Egyptians really? And what did they intend with their strange customs and gigantic buildings? The ancient civilization on the Nile still raises many unanswered questions today. Were the Egyptians really normal people, or perhaps a super race that possibly came to Earth from another world? Until now, researchers have been searching for answers to these questions in the deserts of Egypt, but now a Frenchman has found what he was looking for on the bottom of the sea. Thonis-Heracleion is a city lost between legend and reality. Before the founding of Alexandria in 331 BC, the city experienced glorious times. As the largest port of entry into Egypt, all ships from the Greek world docked here. In addition to its importance as a port city, Thonis-Heracleion also had a religious significance. The center was the Temple of Ammon, which played an important role in ensuring the Egyptian ruling dynasties. The city was probably founded around the 8th century BC, suffered various natural disasters, and finally sank completely into the depths of the Mediterranean in the 8th century AD. Frank Gaudio and his team are experts on civilizations lost at sea. The underwater archaeologist first turned his attention to the search for sunken Egyptian port cities in 1992. There are various accounts of a magnificent port and trading city called Thonis and a Greek port city dedicated to the hero Heracles. For a long time, experts considered the reports to be possible fables or mystical tales. But Frank Gaudio was not one of those people who believe in myths. The experienced underwater archaeologist has already uncovered real-life legends and wonders too often attributed to legends. The researcher was certain that there had to be at least some truth to the fantastic reports about the cities of Thonis and Heracleion. Gaudio followed his instincts and he struck gold. For almost a decade, the diving expert and his team searched off the coast of present-day Egypt until he made the groundbreaking discovery in 2000. Gaudio recovered the first statues from the meter-deep mud of the Egyptian basin, and they were so gigantic that experts were amazed. Thonis-Heracleion, from myth to fact. It is incredible what treasures lie on the Egyptian seabed. Before Gaudio and his divers made their discovery, no one could have imagined that the entire treasure troves were hidden in the mud off the Egyptian coast. Longingly and with a touch of pathos, experts studied ancient writings, which came primarily from the Greek historian Herodotus. The archaeologists and historians raved about the tales of the Great Temple, the hundreds of ships that were moored in Thonis, and they read about the famous hero Heracles, who first set foot on Egyptian soil in the city named after him. Later, the Trojans, fleeing from the Greek king Menelaus, are said to have sought shelter in Heracleion. Paris and his beautiful bride Helen supposedly spent several years indulging in the pleasures and luxuries of their Egyptian exile before Menelaus tracked them down and the Trojan War broke out. The last reports told of a magnificent city located east of Canopus at the mouth of the Canoponic branch of the Nile. After that, all traces of the two legendary port cities were lost. Gaudio was certain that both cities existed. The expert knew exactly how soft and changeable the Egyptian soil is. Port cities like Alexandria, Thonis, and Heracleion were built on spongy ground. The land masses of Egypt have also changed dramatically in the last 2,000 years due to the Nile. Every year, Egypt's lifeline washes thousands of tons of mud through the country. The people of the country have been living off the fertile soil for thousands of years, but the mud is also filling the Mediterranean Sea off Egypt, resulting in constant changes to the coastline. For Gaudio and his team, reconstructing the old coastline was a kind of scavenger hunt. Using a unique approach based on measurements and cutting-edge technology, Frank Gaudio managed to find the city. And what the researchers discovered on the seabed was shocking. It is incredible how well preserved the districts lie on the bottom of the Mediterranean and the splendor that the relics still show today. The biggest surprise, however, was that Thonis and Heracleion were one and the same city. The Egyptians called the most magnificent city on the Mediterranean Thonos, and the Greeks called their most important port in Africa Heracleion. About 6.5 kilometers from the present-day coast, in the western part of the Abukar Bay, the researchers uncovered large parts of the ancient city at a depth of only about 10 meters. No one expected the remains of the city to be so well preserved. All this time, this wonder was just a stone's throw from the coast and at a depth that is actually laughable for divers. It was only the murky water that had prevented researchers from locating the city for decades. Visibility in the Abukar Bay is particularly poor when the Nile is in flood and carries mud with it. The researchers were very lucky when the incredible treasures revealed themselves at a time when the visibility in the basin was clear. Frank Gaudio discovered almost all of the city's missing wonders: the Great Temple of Amun, the remains of the magnificent harbor facilities, and the relics of entire boulevards and buildings. The mapping of the city began in 1996, and to this day, by no means the entire area has been explored. So far, an area of 11 by 15 kilometers has been explored in more detail, but there are probably far more treasures on the seabed. Thonis-Heracleion must once have been gigantic in size. The city, which could easily compete with Alexandria in size and splendor, controlled all trade to Egypt for centuries. The city was a melting pot of cultures. Egyptians met Greeks, Nubians, and Black Africans traded with other ancient Mediterranean empires. Incredible riches were shipped from Thonis-Heracleion every year. The granaries of Egypt flourished, and the grain trade provided food for the whole of Greece and the Black Sea region. Rare spices, precious woods, slaves, wild animals, furs, and works of art were shipped from Africa. This is what Thonis-Heracleion really looked like. Can you imagine the splendor, the confusion, the bustle in the streets, and the incredible diversity of people who once lived and traded in the city? The objects recovered in the excavations convey a glimpse of the former beauty and glory of this legendary city. Gaudio recovered colossal statues, jewelry, coins, and architectural elements. The city's wealth and beauty reached their absolute peak from the 6th to the 4th century BC. Coins, jewelry, and artifacts from the numerous temples paint a vivid picture of a city that was a hub of international trade and a melting pot of cultures. In the old port facilities alone, 79 shipwrecks have been recovered that are still in remarkably good condition today. Gaudio reports on 40 other wrecks that have not yet been sufficiently examined and confirmed. The maritime activity and wealth must have been truly enormous. The city was built in a ring around the central temple of Amun. Amun was a ram-headed god of the Nubians, a deity of creation and wealth. The Nubian kingdom bordered Egypt to the south. Through wars, alliances, and centuries of mutual influence, Amun also became an important god for the Egyptians. A network of canals extended around the temple of Amun. Magnificent residences were built on small islands, and the inhabitants used both roads and canals to get around the city. Finds such as bronze statuettes of oriental deities prove that different ethnic groups and religions lived together peacefully in Thonis-Heracleion. On the north side of the Temple of Heracles, a large canal ran from east to west through the city, connecting the enormous harbor basin with the city. Today, we can hardly imagine that beauty, trade, and religion are one and the same. For the Egyptians, this was reality. Where there's wealth and trade, there are also pleasures, sins, and luxury. In addition to Isis, the goddess of beauty and love, the mysteries of Osiris were particularly honored in Thonis-Heracleion. Every year, extensive celebrations were held in honor of the god of rebirth, during which a statue of Osiris was brought by boat from the chapels in the Temple of Dendera to the stele of the royal decree of Canopus. The journey on the harbor canals of the Nile represented the journey of rebirth of all life, and the cycle of decay and return was directly associated by the Egyptians with wealth and trade. The end of the splendor came abruptly. Did the Egyptians suspect that they had built their wealth on shaky ground? The old coastlines of Egypt were created over millions of years by sediment deposits from the Nile. The sandy soil quickly absorbed water and is very unstable overall. It is a miracle that Thonis-Heracleion existed for so long. In the middle of the 2nd century AD, the first catastrophe occurred. Egypt experienced a devastating earthquake. The quake already tore crevices in the ground, A tsunami that drove meter-high waves to the fragile coast of Egypt simply washed away large parts of Thonis-Heracleion. The port facilities and large parts of the royal city of Alexandria also fell victim to this disaster. Nevertheless, the city continued to exist in its ruins for several centuries, until another disaster occurred in the 8th century AD, and the remains of the city also sank into the sea. In 2021, the last excavations brought to light the almost perfectly preserved remains of a galley from the Ptolemaic times. The ship was still lying exactly as it was moored at the dock of the southern facade of the Temple of Ammon in 200 BC. It was suddenly hit by the wave, washed over, and covered by a 5-meter-high layer of mud over the course of centuries. Even more than 20 years after the ancient city was first located, Gaudio's discoveries are far from complete. It will probably take decades before all the riches and treasures of Thonis-Heracleion have been recovered. After this sensational discovery, Frank Gaudio pulled off another stroke of genius. With his team, the experts also tracked down the sunken parts of Alexandria. He even managed to find the lost palace of Cleopatra. The legendary Queen of Beauty, lover of Julius Caesar and wife of Mark Antony, had resided very close to the harbor. When the palace was washed away, the most beautiful woman of antiquity was no longer alive. Subscribe to the channel now and look forward to many more exciting videos.